They didn't mean for me to see the card. That much was obvious. It had been left on the kitchen counter, half tucked beneath a glossy catalog from a high-end furniture store. At first glance, it looked like any other birthday card, pastel-colored with silver embossing and a generic "Happy 70th, Mom" printed across the front. But the handwriting on the envelope wasn't mine, nor was the tone meant for me. It was addressed to Rose. My name is Evelyn. I should have walked away. I should have assumed it was a card meant for another mother, another birthday, another kitchen. But something made me reach for it. Maybe it was the way the envelope had been carelessly abandoned, or maybe it was the small voice inside me that had been whispering for months, "Something isn't right." I opened it. Inside was a handwritten message in my daughter's distinctive cursive. "Thanks for giving us the green light to move forward. The renovations will be stunning. Once Evelyn is officially moved into the suite, we'll start the rest. The legal transfer should go through before the end of the month if all goes according to plan. Happy early birthday."
C.
I read it again. Once Evelyn is officially moved into the suite. Not a guest room, a suite. Like I was luggage. Something to be tucked away while the house changed hands. I pressed the card flat on the counter, my fingers stiff, my breath catching as if the very air in the room had changed. This wasn't just carelessness. It wasn't just insensitivity. It was a plan. I stood in the kitchen of the house I had lived in for 42 years, surrounded by the soft clinking of crystal vases and the faint scent of lavender potpourri I had always loved. But suddenly, it felt like I was trespassing in a home that was already being prepared for someone else. "Mom, have you seen the swatch samples?" My daughter's voice floated in from the sunroom. I turned slowly. Claire stood there with her iPad and a glass of white wine, barefoot on the hardwood floors she'd already started referring to as original features in her design mock-ups. Behind her, my granddaughter Maddie lounged on the white linen couch I'd just cleaned, scrolling through Pinterest boards and laughing at something on her phone. I cleared my throat. "I found something interesting," I said calmly. Claire looked up with that smile she always reserved for when she needed to sell me on something. "Is it the color palettes? I really think sage green is going to brighten up the whole space." I held up the card.
No.
"Just this." Her face froze. It lasted half a second, just long enough for the truth to flicker across her expression like a lightning flash, and then it was gone. "Oh," she said, blinking. "That was a mistake. It was meant for a colleague. Someone at work. You know how I mix things up sometimes." A blatant lie. One that Maddie didn't even bother to support. "I see," I replied, placing the card back on the counter, deliberately aligning it with the edge like I'd done with dinner settings my entire life. "You might want to be more careful with your mix-ups, especially when they involve someone's home." Claire didn't respond. Maddie glanced up, then looked away again. I left the room quietly. I always had. That was my role. The quiet matriarch. The calm. The peacekeeper. The one who made things easier. Who smoothed out tension like wrinkles on a linen napkin. But something shifted in me that afternoon. Upstairs, in the master bedroom I still technically occupied, I opened the bottom drawer of my cedar chest and pulled out the last remaining box from my late husband's study. I hadn't touched it in over a decade. Inside, his old notebooks, legal briefs, his glasses, and beneath them all, a worn black leather planner with a single line scrawled on the inside cover. "Control is never surrendered. It's either taken or protected." It was one of his favorite sayings. Judge Nathaniel Rhodes, known in court for his unshakable demeanor and piercing sense of justice. People always said we were opposites. He was the voice. I was the silence. But the truth was, I learned everything about power by watching him. Power wasn't always loud. It was steady, consistent. It waited, and then it struck precisely when the timing was right. That evening, over dinner, I watched Claire serve Maddie grilled salmon and roasted asparagus on the fine china I once told her was too precious for everyday use. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Claire said, running her fingers along the gold trim. "I think we should keep it displayed once we renovate the cabinets." I said nothing. "You okay, Mom?" Claire asked, glancing up. "You've been quiet." I'm listening, I replied, folding my napkin carefully. You learn a lot by doing that. Maddie laughed nervously. You always say that, Grandma. I do, I said, because it's true. That night, I went to the study and made a call I hadn't made in nearly 15 years. Marshall Langston. A deep voice answered. My husband's former law partner. Marshall, I said. It's Evelyn. I think I need some advice. A pause. Evelyn, he said slowly. It's been a long time. What kind of advice? The kind you give someone who's about to be moved out of her own home by her daughter before her birthday. Another pause. But not from confusion. From recognition. I'm listening, he said. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just being listened to. I was being heard. Before we continue, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to more powerful stories like this one. The morning after my call to Marshall, I stood at the bay window in my bedroom, staring out at the garden I had nurtured since Claire was in middle school. The hydrangeas were blooming early this year, blue and full like they used to be when Nathaniel was alive. Back then, we held garden parties here every June. Judges, professors, neighborhood dignitaries. Claire would help me arrange flowers for the tables. Maddie used to dance barefoot in the lawn while fireflies flickered in the dusk. And now, they were planning to replace this garden with a Japanese rock installation and water features. Claire said it was more contemporary, more sellable. My fingers tightened around the teacup in my hands. The memory of that card wouldn't leave me. The words echoing in my ears. Once Evelyn is officially moved into the suite, the way they talked about me as if I were some last obstacle between them and a house they already believed was theirs. I hadn't missed it. The way they stopped asking for my opinion. How Claire would refer to my home as our property. How Maddie would wave off my stories like they were useless nostalgia. And the card, well, that was just confirmation of what my instincts had been whispering all year. They were planning to move me out of my own home. Not after I passed. Not even with the dignity of transparency. But quietly, slowly, strategically. Before my 70th birthday. Because that was the trigger. On my 70th birthday, the inheritance from Nathaniel's estate, tied up in a conservative, generational trust, would be accessible. For years, I'd kept it untouched, honoring the clause he and I had agreed on. It was to pass to Claire only if I relinquished control or became incapacitated. They were betting on both. At 10 a.m. sharp, Marshall arrived at the house in his tailored charcoal suit, still walking like a man who'd spent a lifetime commanding courtrooms. His eyes scanned the foyer like a seasoned litigator entering unfamiliar terrain. You've kept it the same, he said, nodding toward the mahogany sideboard Nathaniel loved. I tried, I replied. Claire thinks the antique pieces clash with her plans for an open-concept layout. Marshall raised an eyebrow. She planning to knock down the past too? I didn't smile. She's trying. We settled in the sunroom. Ironic, really, considering Claire once told me I'd be moved into this space because it had the best light for someone who reads all day. A pretty way of saying, this will be your corner. Stay here. I slid the birthday card across the table. Marshall read it slowly, then looked up. And she left this out? Just like that. It wasn't meant for me. But then again, neither is this house anymore. He exhaled through his nose. We can work with this. I'm not trying to burn everything down, I said quietly. But I need to be certain they can't push me into a corner. Legally, financially, or emotionally. Marshall leaned back. Let me ask you something, Evelyn. When Nathaniel set up the trust, you both agreed to give Claire access at your 70th birthday under the assumption that she would act with integrity, that she'd care for the legacy. But he put in safeguards, cognitive assessments, power of attorney limitations, co-signatures. Do you remember why? I nodded. Because he said loving your family doesn't mean trusting them blindly. Marshall pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Exactly. Now, let's make sure that trust doesn't turn into a weapon. We spent the next 2 hours combing through old documents, wills, amendments, real estate filings. I had kept them all, filed meticulously in my husband's old cabinet, beneath a layer of dust and lavender drawer liners. The plan was already forming in my mind. Step 1. Secure the house. Step 2. Verify cognitive clarity. Step 3. Gather evidence of manipulation. Step 4. Reassert control. Quietly, precisely, and legally. By the time Marshall left, we had a strategy. The moment the front door closed behind him, I found myself standing in front of the mirror in the hallway. The one Claire kept suggesting we remove because it distorts the light. I stared at the woman looking back at me. White hair swept into a neat bun. A soft cashmere cardigan. Minimal makeup. To most people, she might look like someone who had become soft with age. But I knew better. Because behind the cardigan was a spine made of iron. And behind the quiet demeanor was a mind that once ran a charity fund with more assets than Claire's company had ever touched. They had forgotten who I was. And that was my greatest advantage. That evening, during dinner, Claire poured wine and floated new ideas about the kitchen remodel. I was thinking of removing the island entirely, she said casually. It makes the space feel dated. Maddie nodded. Totally. Like, it's giving 1990s. I chewed slowly. That island was installed the year you were born, Claire. Nathaniel picked it out. He liked the butcher block. Claire paused. Well, I just think he'd want it updated. I replied with a small smile. He'd want it respected. Silence. Then Maddie, shrugging, I mean, it's just furniture, Grandma. No, I said, my voice firmer now. It's memory. It's intention. And it's still mine. Claire's glass hit the table just a little too hard. Nobody's trying to take anything from you. But her eyes told a different story. They were calculating again. Measuring. Assessing. I stood slowly, gathering the plates. Dinner was lovely, I said. Thank you both for your input. Back in the kitchen, I opened my notebook, the one Marshall had insisted I start. Not for posterity. For evidence. I jotted down the conversation word for word. They weren't just planning. They were executing. And they didn't know that I was documenting everything. The days of being passive were over. Because what they failed to remember is that I didn't just raise a family. I sat beside a man who built empires from ironclad contracts and contingency clauses. I helped him write them. I took notes. And now I was taking them again. It was Maddie who slipped first. The next morning, I made her blueberry pancakes, the kind I used to make when she was little, the kind she once claimed were better than IHOP, even the whipped cream part. She smiled when I set them down, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. So, Grandma, she said, pushing a berry around with her fork. When do you think you'll be ready to downsize? My hands froze for half a second. I just reached for the syrup. Downsize. I asked lightly, sitting down across from her. Yeah, you know, smaller space, easier to maintain. I read this thing online about how older people thrive when they let go of big homes. More freedom, less stress. I offered a gentle laugh. Is that so? And where did you read this? BuzzFeed or Architectural Digest? She blinked. I don't remember. It just made sense. I leaned forward. Tell me, Maddie, do you think I'm unhappy here? She hesitated. No, it's just, Mom says you've been getting more tired lately. That it might be too much to manage this place alone. I smiled. Your mother's very thoughtful. But she forgets I've had 40 years to learn this house. It listens to me now. Maddie gave a tight smile in return and reached for her phone. Anyway, just something to consider. The tone, the delivery, the timing, all rehearsed. They were soft-launching the idea. After breakfast, I went for a walk through the neighborhood, past the shops on Fern Hollow and the old synagogue Nathaniel and I donated to after his retirement. A woman named Julia from the planning committee spotted me and waved. Evelyn, you're back. We've missed your ideas for the Heritage Garden. I paused. Claire had insisted I give up the position months ago, said it was too much pressure. You need to relax and enjoy your years, she'd said. But standing there on the cobbled sidewalk with Julia smiling brightly, I realized I didn't want to give up that voice. Not here. Not yet. I'm still very much interested, Julia. Why don't we meet next Thursday? I'll bring my binder.
She grinned.
I'll make sure your spot's reserved. That afternoon, I made another call to an old friend named Lorraine who worked in records at the county clerk's office. Lorraine, darling, I wonder if you could help me look up something quiet like. You're not divorcing anyone, are you? Nothing quite so scandalous. Just curious if there's been any new paperwork filed under my address. Her voice changed immediately. You suspect something? I suspect everything. She called back an hour later. There's a draft transfer request. Unfiled and signed, but it's there. A legal intent to assign property. Filed electronically. I close my eyes. Whose name is on the request? Claire Rhodes. With power of attorney pending. But Evelyn, she doesn't have POA. Not yet. No, I replied. She doesn't. But she's hoping I won't notice when she tries to make it official. Lorraine exhaled. Want me to flag it? Not yet. Let her think I'm asleep. Back home, I tucked that information into the growing folder in my bedroom safe. I labeled it Project Evergreen, a nod to the name Nathaniel and I had given this house when we bought it in 1983. It was supposed to be our forever home. And if Claire thought I was going to let her turn it into an investment flip, she was going to learn something new about her mother. The following day, Claire waltzed into the kitchen dressed in pressed white linen and soft leather flats. You're looking sharp, I said without turning from the teapot. She beamed. Just meeting someone for coffee downtown. Nothing fancy. Maddie came down a few minutes later in gym leggings, whispering something about a facial appointment. They left quickly. Too quickly. I waited 5 minutes before pulling up the hidden camera feed I'd set up in the study the night before. A motion-activated lens tucked neatly between 2 hardcovers on the shelf, installed by Lorraine's grandson, who did IT security on the side. Sure enough, at exactly 11:22 a.m., the front door opened again. Claire re-entered, alone, and let a man in a blazer through the house. A realtor. My blood cooled as I watched her gesture around the foyer with exaggerated flair. Her voice didn't carry clearly through the feed, but her hand motions did. She pointed to the fireplace, the windows, the kitchen. She opened the pantry as if she'd already cleared me out of it. Then she led him into the sunroom, my supposed suite. She pointed to the garden, to the space near the oak tree. He nodded, made notes. She handed him a file. And then, most damning of all, she opened a leather folder and showed him a document. I froze the video.
Zoomed in.
Power of attorney. Signed and dated.
But not by me.
Someone had forged my signature. The handwriting wasn't even close. She wasn't just maneuvering. She was committing fraud. That evening, I returned to the kitchen early and sat in the exact seat Claire usually took, waiting. When she walked in, she paused. Oh, hi, Mom. Didn't think you'd be in so early. Want some tea? I looked up from the table, my expression unreadable. Tell me something, Claire. What color do you think the walls should be once you sell this house? Her face went pale.
What?
I slid the printed image across the table, the paused frame of her and the realtor in my sunroom. You should be more careful with your cameras. The house still listens to me, remember? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I stood slowly. This conversation isn't over. But for now, I want you to remember one thing. What? She whispered. I'm not the one being downsized. You are. Claire didn't come down for breakfast the next morning.
Neither did Maddie.
I took my tea alone in the sunroom, and let the silence stretch. I wasn't angry. Not in the way Claire assumed I'd be. No slammed doors. No dramatic confrontations. Because anger is reactive. And I was done reacting. I was executing now. At 10:15 a.m. sharp, a familiar car pulled up outside the house. Sleek, navy blue. Discreet. Marshall Langston stepped out with a leather briefcase in one hand and a folder tucked under his arm. Claire opened the front door before I could. She blinked. Oh, hello. He smiled warmly, like he'd just run into someone unimportant. Claire Rhodes, I presume. I'm Marshall Langston, your mother's attorney. She looked from him to me, then back again. Mom, what's going on? I joined them in the foyer. Marshall's here to help clarify some things. Since there's been a bit of confusion regarding ownership and power of attorney. Claire's voice shifted immediately. Too quick, too polished. There's no confusion. I was just helping with long-term planning. And forged my signature in the process? I asked calmly. Her face twisted. I didn't forge anything. That's absurd. Marshall opened the folder. Then you won't mind explaining why this POA form, filed electronically under your login credentials, contains a signature that has already been verified as not belonging to your mother? Claire paled. I must have sent the wrong draft. I was going to ask Mom to sign later. It was just a placeholder. Filed with the county? I asked, arching an eyebrow. Claire looked down. Maddie crept in from the hallway, wide-eyed. What's happening? Nothing, sweetheart, Claire said sharply. Just a misunderstanding. No, dear, I said, locking eyes with my daughter. It's called legal fraud. Marshall handed Claire a formal letter. This is a cease and desist regarding any further legal filings involving your mother's estate, property, or trust. As of this morning, your access to shared financial accounts has been revoked. All relevant institutions have been notified. Claire's jaw dropped. You're cutting me off? I'm protecting myself, I corrected. You can't do this. I'm your daughter. Marshall didn't even flinch. She can and she has. Claire laughed bitterly, turning to me. Is this really how you want our relationship to end? With lawyers and threats? No, I said softly. This is how I want it to begin again, with truth. She blinked, caught off guard. You've been manipulating me, Claire. Quietly, subtly, but deliberately. You didn't ask me to step aside. You decided I would. You assumed I wouldn't notice. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You haven't been well, Mom. You've been forgetful, scattered. I took a cognitive assessment last week. I interrupted. Fully documented. Dr. Winters has known me for 30 years. He found no signs of impairment. That silenced her. You didn't think I'd verify things for myself, did you? Maddie stepped forward, hesitant. Gran, I didn't know about any of this. I turned to her. Didn't you? She hesitated. Not the forged signature stuff. That's crazy. But yeah, Mom's been saying you're slowing down. That we needed to plan ahead. I nodded. Planning ahead is wise. Taking what isn't yours is not. Claire finally found her voice again. What about the trust? Dad said. I've amended the trust, I said. Marshall filed the updated terms this morning. You will no longer receive automatic control of the estate on my birthday. Claire gasped. You'll receive what's left when I'm gone. And not a moment sooner. Marshall handed her another envelope. Here's the updated structure. As of now, a charitable foundation will manage all assets until such time that your mother passes. Disbursements to family will be evaluated annually, based on merit and need. Claire was shaking. So, you're just going to humiliate us? After everything we've done for you? You mean after everything I've done for you? I replied. Who's going to believe you? She hissed suddenly. You think people will take your word over mine? I stepped closer, lowering my voice.
Claire.
I have photos. I have audio. I have documents. And I have allies. You spent years positioning me behind the scenes like some piece of antique furniture. But while you were busy replacing wallpaper, I was rebuilding my legacy. Marshall cleared his throat. If you'd like to dispute any of this, Claire, I recommend obtaining your own legal counsel. But do note that your actions over the past several months may already meet the threshold for an elder exploitation investigation. She stared at me in disbelief, as if she truly couldn't comprehend that the woman standing before her was the same one who once cried over a chipped teacup. I didn't cry anymore. I watched her storm out, Maddie trailing behind with an uncertain glance. Marshall turned to me once the door closed. You sure you want to give them a second chance? No, I said. But I'm giving myself the dignity of offering it. 2 days after Claire's outburst, the apology flowers arrived. White lilies and blush roses in an overpriced glass vase, shipped from a boutique florist downtown with a neatly typed note. Mom, I'm sorry things escalated. Let's talk when you're ready. Love, Claire. No handwritten message. No ownership. Just manufactured remorse wrapped in ribbon. I placed the bouquet on the sideboard without removing the plastic card stick. It was theatrical, not sincere. And after everything she'd tried, manipulating my image, falsifying a document, attempting to quietly erase me from my own home, it was going to take more than petals and PR. That afternoon, I reviewed the revised disbursement structure with Marshall again, just to be certain. Every detail had been arranged for clarity and control. The house would remain in my name exclusively. All financial distributions would now require dual verification from the board of the newly established Evelyn Rhodes Legacy Fund, a charity I had launched, backed by private donations and assets Claire never even knew existed. Maddie's tuition was now covered directly through the fund, bypassing Claire entirely. It was all perfectly legal, perfectly airtight. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Claire had gone quiet, and quiet, I knew from experience, was never a good sign. That evening, I stepped into the dining room for a family dinner I had arranged myself. Just three of us, me, Maddie, and Jackson. Yes, Jackson. He had called the day after the confrontation, his voice unusually heavy. Evelyn, I need to speak to you. Alone. I think I've been blind to what's really been happening. Now he sat across from me at the long oak table Nathaniel built with his own hands, the flicker of the chandelier casting shadows across his face. Maddie picked at her plate. So, are we going to talk about the elephant in the room? Which one? I asked, sipping my wine. Jackson smiled faintly. Maddie didn't. I didn't know Mom was doing all that behind your back, she said. I swear. I mean, I knew she had plans, but she always said it was for your own good. Manipulators often wrap harm in the language of care, I said gently. It's how they keep your mouth shut while they move the walls in around you. Jackson shifted forward. There's more, Evelyn. I met his eyes. They were earnest, troubled. She's already spoken to another attorney, he said, about contesting the amendment to the trust. Maddie gasped. Jackson continued. She said she was coerced, that your mental state was being influenced by your attorney. She's planning to argue undue influence and fraud. I laughed, not loudly, but with a sound so sharp it made Maddie wince. She's welcome to try, I said, but I've taught courses on coercion. I know what it is and what it's not. She's scared, Maddie whispered. She thought she could handle you, and now she knows she can't. No, I replied. Now she remembers she can't. Jackson leaned back. So, what now? I looked between the two of them. Now we wait. Let her dig her hole. Let her build her case. I'll supply the dirt and hand her the shovel. They were both silent. Justice, I said, has its own kind of patience. After dinner, Maddie lingered behind while Jackson stepped outside to take a call. I meant what I said, she told me. I didn't know. I want to believe that, I said softly. But you laughed when she called me forgetful. You stood by when she made plans without asking me. You may not have signed anything, Maddie, but you let her write the script. Her eyes glistened. I didn't know how to stop her. That's because you didn't try, I said gently. But you're still young. You can learn. And if you're willing, I'll teach you. She looked up, hopeful. Teach me what? I placed a hand on hers. Everything she never understood about legacy, about power, about respect. But first, you'll shadow me at the foundation for a year. No title, no special treatment. You'll earn your place. Her voice cracked. Okay.
I smiled then.
A real one. She left shortly after, and I returned to my study. There, on the desk, sat the most important letter I hadn't sent yet. It was addressed to Claire Rhodes. A formal invitation to a mediation session with me, Marshall, and a third-party legal observer. An olive branch. Not of reconciliation, but of controlled re-entry. She had 10 days to respond. It wasn't forgiveness. It was structure. It was boundaries. It was her final test. And behind every smile I offered from now on was a clause. Claire waited until the very last day. On the evening of the 10th day, Just before the 5 p.m. deadline, Marshall called. She sent a reply. Via courier. Just landed on my desk. And? I asked, steadying my voice. She's agreed to mediation, he said. But she added conditions. Of course she did. She wants it to be private. No third-party mediator. Just you, me, and her. I leaned back in my chair, the late afternoon sun casting amber light through the window across my lap. The same window Claire once suggested bricking up to make room for more shelving. No, I said simply. She doesn't get to set the terms anymore. I thought you might say that, Marshall said. So, I already confirmed with Judge Hadley to preside. Retired, but sharp as ever. She's known you both for decades. If Claire refuses, it'll look like she's dodging a neutral party. Good. Let her squirm. Let her finally experience what it's like to not control the narrative. The mediation was set for Friday at 10 a.m. in a neutral meeting room at Marshall's firm. Glass walls, tasteful furniture, water pitchers on coasters that cost more than my first car. The kind of setting where people confuse civility with safety. Claire arrived 10 minutes late. She swept in like a woman on a mission, dressed in sleek gray, designer sunglasses perched atop her head, and that forced smile, tight at the corners, meant to disarm. She looked surprised to see Judge Hadley already seated. Claire, I said with a polite nod. Thank you for coming. Her smile faltered, but she returned the greeting. She didn't look at Marshall. She barely acknowledged the judge. It was all about me. Always had been. Let's begin, Judge Hadley said crisply, folding her hands. I've reviewed the documents provided. Evelyn has amended the trust. Claire, you've raised concerns. This mediation is an opportunity to clarify intentions and resolve disputes. If we cannot, we proceed through formal litigation. Claire crossed her legs. I don't want to drag this into court. I'm just concerned that my mother's recent decisions don't reflect the clarity she's always had. And what evidence do you have of that? Judge Hadley asked evenly. Claire hesitated. She's been erratic, making big changes, locking accounts, starting new foundations. It's unlike her. It's called asserting my autonomy, I replied calmly. I was passive for too long. I'm not saying you're incapable, Claire added quickly. Just that you've always been trusting. And people like Marshall. Be careful, I said, my tone flat. Her eyes narrowed. Mom, you did change everything suddenly. And to remove me completely from decision-making. Do you know how that looks? I do. It looks like consequences. Marshall slid a folder across the table. Judge Hadley, this is a summary of Evelyn's cognitive evaluation, completed independently and documented by Dr. Richard Winters. He attests she is fully competent and acting with full understanding. The judge reviewed it. This is thorough. Claire, did you know this existed? Claire's mouth twisted. I had my concerns. No, I said. You had a plan. And it failed. There was a long pause. Claire's voice softened then.
Strategically.
I thought we were a team. After Dad died, I helped you. I handled the bills, the vendors, the paperwork. I was trying to protect the family. You were trying to protect control, I replied. That's different. And you didn't help me. You erased me. One small step at a time. Moving photos. Redirecting mail. Scheduling appointments I didn't ask for. And then the realtor. She swallowed. You weren't preserving the legacy. You were rebranding it. Marshall interjected, placing another document on the table. This is the key section of the trust amendment. The clause your mother added herself. Judge Hadley read it aloud. Any future disbursements or access to legacy assets by Claire Rhodes shall be contingent upon her participation in a restorative training program administered by the Evelyn Rhodes Foundation. Said program must be completed in full, with documented attendance and behavioral evaluations, before eligibility is reconsidered. Claire's jaw dropped. A training program? You're putting me in a class? I'm offering you a chance, I said. She looked like she'd been slapped. This is humiliating. No, I said. This is structure. If you'd like money, access, or power, then you'll learn what they actually require. You can't make me do this. I'm not making you do anything, I replied. But the door you tried to slam behind me? I built it. I decide who walks through it now. Claire stood abruptly. You're unbelievable. I'm finally believable, I said. She looked at the judge, then Marshall, and then me, her face unreadable. I'll think about it, she muttered. No rush, Marshall said smoothly. But do keep in mind, the trust doesn't wait for indecision. The foundation does. As she stormed out of the room, I could feel the shift in the air. For the first time in a long time, Claire wasn't the one holding the reins. And for the first time in her life, she was going to have to earn her inheritance. The weekend after mediation, I hosted my first official dinner under the Evelyn Rhodes Foundation. It wasn't large, just 16 guests, former colleagues, local philanthropists, 2 trustees from Nathaniel's old legal fellowship, and a handful of women from the leadership program I'd quietly launched. We held it in my dining room, the same dining room Claire once suggested gutting to create a more modern flow. I kept it exactly as it was: polished oak, linen napkins, and Judge Sullivan's original place settings, each one a silent reminder. This legacy has structure, memory, and rules. The table was set for 17. The extra chair was intentional. Claire had received her invitation via courier 2 days before, sealed in thick cream stationery with the Rhodes crest in gold. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a public test. Attend. Observe. Learn. Attendance didn't guarantee restoration, but her absence would speak louder than anything she said during mediation. At 6:59 p.m., the front door opened.
She arrived.
I watched from the hallway as she hesitated in the entry, shoulders squared, chin high, as though walking into court without a case. Her heels clicked on the hardwood like punctuation. She wore navy. Conservative. Not flashy. Maddie followed a few steps behind, helping the new intern from the foundation carry files into the front room. She offered me a soft smile. I returned it. That girl was learning. Slowly, but she was learning. Claire looked at me, but said nothing. Her eyes flitted toward the dining room where the guests were already gathering. I gestured toward the coat closet. If you're staying, you know where to hang your mask. She blinked. Your coat, I added with a faint smile. It's tradition. She gave a tight nod and hung it herself. Dinner began precisely at 7:10. I took my usual place at the head of the table. To my left sat Dr. Avani Mehra, our newest board advisor, and to my right, Marshall. Claire's seat, conspicuously, was placed halfway down the table, between 2 local businesswomen who had both endured public family betrayals and rebuilt everything from the ground up. It wasn't a punishment. It was education. And everyone in the room knew it. Throughout the meal, I watched Claire closely. She listened more than she spoke, asked few questions, sipped her wine slowly. When Marshall mentioned the foundation's next campaign, an initiative supporting elderly women who'd been financially exploited by their families, I caught the way her jaw stiffened.
Good.
Let her sit with it. At dessert, Dr. Mehra raised her glass. To Evelyn, she said, who reminds us that reinvention is not about becoming someone else, but about reclaiming who we were before we allowed ourselves to be made small. A murmur of approval followed. I felt every word settle into my bones. I glanced at Claire. She was staring down at her crème brûlée, unmoving. When the guests began to leave, she approached me slowly in the kitchen, where I was inspecting a silver teapot Nathaniel once insisted we use even for casual nights. Dinner was lovely, she said. Thank you, I replied, rinsing a spoon. You made your point, she added. Which one? She hesitated. That this is your table. That I don't sit at the center anymore. I turned to face her. That was never the point. You never sat at the center. You just rearranged the chairs when I stepped away. Her jaw tensed. And now I have to earn my place back. I nodded, just like anyone else. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Instead, she looked down. I signed the enrollment forms this morning, she said. For the program. The full course. I paused. You'll have to attend every session. Submit all assignments. and meet with a panel at the end. If you miss anything. I know, she said quickly. I understand. I searched her face, unsure for a moment whether it was performance or progress. But something in her eyes had changed. Not fear. Not manipulation. Humility. She turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. One question, she said without turning. Did you ever consider just cutting me off entirely? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Silence. Then why didn't you? I picked up the teacup, placed it back on the tray, and answered quietly. Because your daughter's still watching. And so is mine. 6 weeks into the Foundation's pilot mentorship program, Claire completed her first major assignment. It wasn't easy for her. I'd seen the strain on her face each week as she took her place, not at the front of the room, where she was used to commanding attention, but at a folding chair 3 rows back, next to a single mother from Dorchester and a retired nurse who'd lost her pension to a predatory son. Each of them had stories. Real ones. Ones Claire couldn't outtalk or gloss over with curated charm. The assignment was simple. Write a 5-page reflection on a moment in your life when you chose silence over truth. And read it aloud to the group. For days, Claire submitted nothing. Then, the night before the deadline, I received a single email. No subject line. Just an attachment. I didn't open it immediately. Not because I doubted her effort, but because I needed to decide what I was willing to feel when I read it. I'd spent months rebuilding my boundaries, my peace, my name. Opening that file meant cracking the door she'd once slammed in my face. I waited until morning. I read it in my sunroom, with a cup of black tea, and the sound of birds outside reminding me that time moved forward, whether we liked it or not. It began plainly. The moment I stopped seeing my mother as a person was the moment I started pretending I knew better. My hands went still on the page. She continued. When my father died, I told everyone I was stepping up, that I was handling things. But I wasn't. I was building a version of control that disguised my fear. My fear of aging, of being alone, of becoming her someday. So, I tried to help by taking over. At first it was small, switching insurance plans, managing the yard work. But then I started adjusting her schedule, removing pictures, making decisions without asking. Because I convinced myself that I was just streamlining the future. What I was really doing was erasing her. By the time I finished, I wasn't crying, but something heavy in my chest began to uncoil. At the bottom, she'd signed her name. Not Claire Rhodes, Director of Rhodes Home Design. The title she plastered on every social post. Just
Claire. Daughter.
participant.
Student.
At the next session, she stood up and read it aloud to a room of women who had every reason not to forgive her. And when she finished, nobody clapped. Nobody needed to. They nodded. And that was enough. Later that afternoon, as she gathered her things, I approached her quietly. You meant it, I said. She nodded. I did. I watched her for a moment. You wrote that legacy isn't inheritance, it's instruction. It is, she said. I never listened. But I'm listening now. I smiled faintly. Then you're further ahead than you were. She looked down at her bag, then back up. What happens now?
Now. Now.
That word used to terrify me, especially when it came from Claire's mouth. It always meant change, and not the kind I'd asked for. But now it felt different. She wasn't asking to control. She was asking to understand. Now, I said carefully, you continue the course. You finish. And when the board reviews your performance, if they believe you've earned it, your foundation stipend will be reinstated next quarter. Not because of who you are, but because of what you're learning to become. Claire didn't argue, didn't thank me. She just nodded. And that was enough. As she turned to leave, I called after her. One more thing. She paused. I stepped toward the bookshelf behind my desk, reached for a small velvet box, the sapphire brooch. She turned, stunned. No, I said gently. Not yet. This is for when the education is complete. Not the program, the legacy. When you've earned the weight of it, not just the shimmer. She blinked rapidly and nodded again. That night, I found myself alone in the garden, the hydrangeas blooming, the soft buzz of city life in the background. I stood beneath the oak tree Nathaniel had planted the day Claire was born. And for the first time since his death, I wasn't protecting what we'd built. I was teaching it. Because legacy isn't about what we pass down. It's about what we insist they carry forward, with intention. And finally, it felt like she might be ready to carry something real. The ballroom hummed with anticipation. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers. Waitstaff moved like shadows across the parquet floor, and my name, Evelyn Rhodes, was etched in gold across the center of the program under the title Keynote Speaker, Founders Gala, Evelyn Rhodes Foundation. The event marked 1 year since the foundation's launch. 1 year since I'd reclaimed control over my name, my estate, and my dignity. It was meant to be a celebration, not of revenge, but of restoration. And for the first time in decades, I stood at the center of a room without apology. Claire hadn't been invited. Not because she hadn't earned it. She was nearly done with the mentorship program and had met every obligation. She hadn't complained once. But the board felt, rightly, that this evening should be mine. A clean acknowledgement. No shadows of controversy or forced reconciliations. I didn't argue until I saw her standing quietly in the back. Not center stage. Not seated at a table. Just standing by the exit in a navy coat, watching. I saw Maddie first, slipping in through a side entrance to bring her in. Maddie, who now interned 2 days a week at the foundation. Maddie, who used to shrug off my stories and now recorded them in a journal we shared between us. A small, handwritten archive of the family she once overlooked. Claire made no move to approach me. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, a small envelope in one, head slightly bowed like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to be there. And in truth, she wasn't. But I said nothing. I had a speech to give. When the director introduced me, the audience rose. A standing ovation before I even said a word. The kind of reception Nathaniel used to receive. The kind of recognition I never thought I'd want for myself until I understood how powerful it was to be seen. I stepped up to the podium and let the silence settle before I began. I've been underestimated for most of my life, I said. Not because I lacked intelligence or voice or strength, but because I was taught that power looked a certain way.
Loud.
Aggressive. Commanding. Masculine. Soft laughter. And for years, I stayed in the background. I supported. I listened. I allowed others to speak louder. Not because they were wiser, but because I was taught silence was a virtue. I looked down at my prepared notes. Then I looked back up and set them aside. But silence, I said, can become a coffin if you stay in it too long. The room went still. I built a life alongside a man who respected my mind, but the world only saw his. I raised a daughter to be independent, only to watch her confuse control with leadership. And I allowed myself, for too long, to be treated as an accessory to my own story. I glanced to the back of the room. Claire hadn't moved. But then something changed. I was almost erased. Quietly. Legally. With a smile. Some people in the room shifted uncomfortably. They knew what I meant. Boston's social circles had buzzed for months after the wedding incident. The canceled payments. The sudden disappearance. And now I was confirming it on record. I tell this story not out of bitterness, but to offer a warning. Never confuse your silence for safety. Sometimes you must rise. Not in rage, but in strategy. Not to punish, but to preserve. I paused and let that linger. This foundation exists because I said no. Not just to exploitation, but to erasure. And because I chose to say yes to myself. My voice. My boundaries. My legacy. The applause came slowly at first, then swelled. But I wasn't finished. One more thing, I said into the microphone. To anyone who has ever felt like they needed to wait for permission to speak, I'll tell you what I told myself when I first looked in the mirror and decided to reclaim my life. You're not behind a column. You are the column. Stop standing in your own shadow. That brought the room to its feet. As I stepped down from the podium, Several guests reached for my hand. Words like thank you and brave and remarkable surrounded me like warm air. But my eyes searched only for one person. Claire was gone. Later, back in my study, I found the envelope she'd left. It was slipped beneath the front door, addressed in her familiar script. To Mom, if you're ready. Inside was a photograph. Not of me. Of the original deed to the house. My house. And underneath it, a handwritten note. I met with Marshall. I've signed the amendment acknowledging full transfer back to you, removing my name entirely. No stipulations. No conditions. I wanted to do it weeks ago, but I waited. Not for the right moment, just for the right understanding. It was never mine. And I'm not asking for it anymore. I'm asking to learn how to build something of my own. No signature. Just the words. Quiet. Sincere. Complete. I sat with the letter for a long time. No anger. No shock. No victory. Just the deep, steady breath of a cycle finally closing. When I stepped outside later that night, the garden was lit by small lanterns Maddie had hung earlier for the event. She'd used the same hooks Nathaniel installed for our 25th anniversary party. She didn't know that, but I did. I remembered every moment. And now, I wasn't guarding memories anymore. I was planting them. Maddie stepped outside and joined me. She saw the whole speech, she said quietly. I know. She didn't want to interrupt. She said this was your night. I smiled. For once, she was right. She looked up at me, her voice small. Do you think she's really changing? I think she's starting to understand that legacy isn't what you take. I looked up at the stars. It's what you leave behind. 3 months later, the house was full again. Not with designers, lawyers, or realtors, but with people. Real people. Laughter. Steam from the kitchen. Dishes clinking. The soft hum of conversation and piano music spilling through the speakers in the study. It was the first time in years that I felt like the home was breathing again. We were hosting a small gathering, not a gala, not a board dinner, just a Sunday meal. The kind Nathaniel and I used to host before everything became so calculated. When friends and family sat around a table for hours, long after dessert, talking about everything and nothing. I prepared the guest list myself. Thoughtfully. Intentionally. Claire was on it. So was Maddie, of course. And Marshall, who had become something of an adopted brother over the past year. Jackson had been invited too, though he'd arrived alone. He and Claire were taking time apart, which was polite code for learning how to be better humans separately. I respected that. We dined in the original dining room, no walls knocked down, no columns repositioned. Just the original table, the original chairs, and new energy. Claire sat 3 seats from the end. Not beside me. Not opposite. Just present. That felt right. When dessert was cleared, and the wine had started to mellow everyone's voices, Maddie stood up and clinked her glass with the back of her spoon. Sorry, she said, blushing slightly. I just wanted to say something. Everyone quieted. Even Claire. I used to think legacy was about what people leave you, Maddie said, her voice soft but steady. Money. Property. Stuff. But this past year, I've watched my grandmother teach us something else. That legacy is what people pour into you, even when you're not ready to carry it. She looked at me. You didn't just protect this family's name. You restored it. And you taught all of us, that silence isn't safety. It's just space waiting to be filled. The room fell silent. And then Claire, unexpectedly, stood. She held something in her hand. A small velvet box. My breath caught. I've been holding on to this for a while, she said, turning toward me. Not because I thought I deserved it, but because I didn't. She crossed the room slowly and opened the box to reveal the sapphire brooch. The one I hadn't seen since the night I told her she'd have to earn it. She placed it on the table in front of me, not pushing it toward me, just offering it. I still have a lot to learn, Claire said. But I know one thing for sure now. I'm not owed this. I never was. I don't want to inherit anything I haven't honored. I didn't move. Then Maddie stood and walked to the table, picked up the brooch, and pinned it gently to my shoulder. She's not ready,
Maddie said.
But you are. That broke me. The tears came before I could stop them, not from sadness or grief or anger, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time.
Peace.
I rose slowly, looked around the room. I've spent so long guarding this house, this family, that I forgot what it was like to open the door and welcome people in. I touched the brooch. This has always been a symbol of strength passed down, but for years it sat in silence, just like I did. I looked to Claire. You're not who you were, but you're not who you need to be yet either.
That's okay.
Because legacy isn't a gift. It's a responsibility. One you earn every day. She nodded, her eyes glistening. And Maddie, I said, turning to her, you already know what this family used to stand for. Now you get to help build what it stands for next. She beamed. I will. The rest of the evening was quiet joy. No backroom whispers. No glances passed over my head. Just conversation.
Candles.
Home. As the guests said their goodbyes and the house grew still, I stood alone in the dining room once more. The silver pocket watch Nathaniel once carried now sat on the mantel beside our wedding photo. The final piece I'd returned to its rightful place. The time ticked softly in the background. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the chair, and sat. Not because someone finally gave me permission, but because I had taken it back. This was still my table, still my home, still my name, and I'd built it strong enough now for everyone to sit at it, without shame, without fear, and without forgetting who made it possible. Sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't what you pass down, it's what you refuse to let go of. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and share your own legacy in the comments below.